Indelible images in the minds of anyone who followed the news of Hurricane Harvey, and indelible memories for the 13 million people who were directly affected by the hurricane. Harvey's story wasn't as much about winds and tides as about rain. Unlike most hurricanes that continue moving forward on a path until they fall apart over dry land, Harvey was different. It struck the Texas coast 3 times and simply refused to move. An entire year's worth of rain fell in 1 week in southeast Texas. The floodwater so heavy that scientists say Houston sank almost an inch under its weight. Harvey flooded hundreds of miles of Texas, from Port Arthur at the Louisiana border to LaGrange, over 100 miles inland. The second worst hurricane since 1900 in the amount of property damage, $125 billion. But Harvey was also a story about everyday heroes, people pitching in to rescue their neighbors. The pictures, more powerful than words can express. Hurricane Harvey, gone, and still very much with us. It was called the grandest city in Texas at the dawn of the 20th century, Galveston, with the largest port, the biggest mansions, the most millionaires, and some of the first telephones and electric lights in Texas. But with the arrival of the hurricane of 1900, Galveston would struggle to ever regain its former status. So devastating was this storm that it's estimated that nearly 1/4 of the city's population died, the worst natural disaster in U.S. history, with a staggering death toll, as many as 8,000 dead, so many that their bodies were loaded on barges and dumped at sea, only to have the cadavers wash ashore. Survivors lit huge funeral pyres to dispose of the unfortunate, most of whom had drowned when a 15-foot tide swept across a city only 5 feet above sea level. The inventor Thomas Edison sent a cameraman who arrived several days after the storm had struck. This remarkable record of the disaster is believed to be the first ever news film. The orphanage where 90 children and 10 nuns died while taking refuge in wooden structures nearby. The daily search for bodies beneath the rubble on Broadway Street. Workers attempting to move a schooner that had washed ashore. At the time of the hurricane, the U.S. Weather Bureau had been in operation for 10 years, but erroneously predicted that it would take a sharp turn north and hit Florida. No warnings for the people of Galveston. It's impossible to visit Galveston today and not see signs of that disaster long ago. The 17-foot seawall that was built after the Great Storm. And this, a simple sculpture that honors the memory of the thousands who lost their lives.
One thing about the ocean waters of the tropics, a calm sea can turn stormy this time of year. And that's what happened the first week of August in 1970, when a small weather disturbance gained strength near Cuba. Hurricane Celia marched across the Gulf of Mexico, making a beeline for Corpus Christi. Even the Weather Service used unusually colorful language to describe Celia's destructive rendezvous with the coastal bend. They said Celia aimed at the Corpus area like a wild beast stalking its prey. And what a beast Celia was. When it slammed into the Texas coast, it had sustained winds of 130 miles an hour. Because of its high winds, 85% of the property damage caused by the storm occurred in Corpus Christi, with 90% of the buildings in downtown either damaged or destroyed. The eye of the storm passed over Port Aransas, where the Weather Service estimated that 3/4 of the homes and businesses there suffered damage or were completely blown away when wind gusts reached 180 miles an hour. Celia was one for the record books. $500 million in property damage. That's equivalent to about $3 billion today. At the time, the costliest hurricane in Texas history, Hurricane Celia, an unwanted Texas visitor in 1970. Hurricane Ike slammed into Galveston County on September 13, 2008. It turned out to be one of the costliest storms in U.S. history, with losses totaling $29 billion. Wind speeds reached 110 miles an hour, but it was water that did most of the damage. The hurricane pushed a 22-foot storm surge into a region dotted with beach communities that were literally wiped off the map by the churning tide. More than 140,000 coastal residents in Ike's path didn't evacuate, despite authorities warning them that they faced certain death. 37 people are known to have lost their lives in the hurricane, and hundreds more remain unaccounted for.
Austin is far enough from the Gulf of Mexico to avoid the direct impact of a hurricane, but still too close for comfort when the storm is this big. Hurricane Allen, 1980, literally filling the entire Gulf Basin with record-breaking winds and unprecedented rain. Sustained winds of 190 miles per hour, the most ever for a Gulf storm. When it came ashore south of Corpus Christi, the Austin area experienced multiple tornadoes. At the airport, millions of dollars worth of aircraft damaged or destroyed. The irony was that many of the planes had been flown away from the coast and into Austin, where they were expected to be safe from the storm. In a North Austin neighborhood, homes and apartments damaged and left unlivable.
From the time the first wind started blowing, it was just blowing, that's all. Maybe a 15-mile-an-hour wind. And then, here it comes.
Despite the multiple tornadoes in Austin, no deaths and only a few injuries. But a different story in San Marcos, where a tornado caused by Allen ripped apart a nursing home and injured 12 people. Throughout central Texas that day in August 1980, strong winds and several tornadoes from a hurricane hundreds of miles away. Down the coast where the storm hit, floods, wind, and destruction in Corpus Christi. When it was over, Allen had left a trail of death and damages from Haiti to Texas, with over 250 people dead and $2.5 billion in damages. So bad that the name Allen was permanently removed from the list of names for future hurricanes. (1961), September 11th, Hurricane Carla crashed into the Texas coast at Port O'Connor. It turned out to be one of the biggest storms in size in hurricane history and caused damage from Port Arthur to Brownsville. That's the entire 600-mile length of the Texas Gulf Coast. Torrential rains and high winds felt in Austin and beyond. When it came ashore, Carla had winds of 170 miles per hour, but it was the storm surge and the high winds that caused much of the damage, flooding homes and businesses from Port Arthur all the way down to Corpus Christi. After the storm passed, the Weather Service reported that most of the injuries from the hurricane were caused by snake bites from the thousands carried in by the floodwaters. Live television coverage about the approaching storm is credited with a surprisingly low death toll. 38 died. Advance warnings led to the evacuation of nearly 400,000 people before the hurricane hit.
The reason we have brought our live remote cameras down here to telecast direct from the United States Weather Bureau in Galveston is the fact that the Weather Bureau here has the radar, that 250-mile range radar is probing out in the Gulf, and that the Galveston station is a key station in helping compile the forecast.
A young reporter named Dan Rather from Houston TV station KVUE reported continuously from the Galveston Weather Service office, something not seen before on TV. Impressed by his reporting, CBS offered Rather a job, and the rest, as they say, is history. Hurricane Carla, the storm that brought massive destruction along the coast and brought television into the age of live reporting from a hurricane. Hurricane Audrey, which devastated Cameron Parish, Louisiana in June 1957. In that era, before weather satellites, it was harder to predict where a hurricane would strike and the timing of a storm's arrival. Only ground-based radar back then could capture a hurricane as it drew near the coastline. For the people of Cameron, it was too late to get to safety. More than 400 people died when the storm came ashore, a high death toll blamed on the incompleteness of evacuations when the storm suddenly increased its forward motion. Weather historians also blame a lack of urgency in the warnings that were issued, and even blamed local politicians for editing weather bulletins before they were broadcast to minimize the severity of the approaching storm. So many lessons learned from the tragedy of Hurricane Audrey. And with the advances in forecast technology today, we now have days and sometimes weeks to follow the path of a hurricane and to make preparations before time runs out.